sweeping introduction to many of the innovations that I had on my radar. Now, for the viewers, be advised that this list could continue. Like Audrey didn't even speak about the presidential hackathon, the participation officers in the ministries, and a lot of other things that I had as bullet points here. Now, I would like to just complete the list with one question, and that is around the entrepreneurial bureaucracy. I heard you talk in an interview about absorbing risks for bureaucrats, where you said, well, basically, taking risks for bureaucrats is like they don't have an incentive to do so, because if they are successful, then all the credit will go to the politician. And if it doesn't work, then they have a problem. And so your job is to absorb risks for the bureaucrats and pass on the credit. Can you elaborate on that and maybe just give an example of what bureaucrats are able to do if they are put in this kind of environment?
Yeah, definitely. So I think the presidential hackathon remains the best demonstration of this principle. Each year, we run this annual event where the president, Dr. Tsai Ing-wen, give a trophy to 5 teams. Now, this year, actually, the presidential hackathon very soon will announce that we have an international track that's not confined to the domestic issues. And the international track, which I think is something that Catalyst 2030 would be interested, is climate action. So we should talk about that. But before that, let's talk about the domestic part. So the domestic part, for example, in 2019 is about enabling sustainable infrastructure. So people think about the critical infrastructures and how to make it more sustainable. For example, this is the team of water saviors, because they literally save water. They're the people in the Taiwan Water Company in the Keelung region. And Taiwan, as some of you know, is currently suffering one of the hardest droughts in our history in the past 100 years. But we've been coping pretty well, actually, partly thanks to the presidential hackathon team. They were prototyping in Keelung a assistive intelligence, a AI system that instead of people going around and listening to the pipes that may or may not be leaking, which made the recruitment of young people joining the water savior very difficult, they co-created a deep learning model so that this model made sure that they take into account the temperature, the various factors in water use, and so on, and they can detect with like 70% accuracy the likely places where a leak happens. Now, there's a lot of innovations like this that didn't get the budget or the political support, or just it didn't work very well because machine learning requires a lot of data and tuning, right? But during the presidential hackathon, we made sure a data collaborative is made. So we work with, for example, the HTC people, the Institute for Information Industry, a university, NCCU graduate level students, even a machine learning expert from our cabinet office, and so on. So the idea is that the public servant who contribute their expertise to this experiment, if it doesn't work, at the end of the 3 months presidential hackathon, there's no losing of face, so to speak, because for all practical purpose, we're just attending a hackathon, right? It's just a social sector organization, a random university, thinking of something fun, and we just join them with the presidential blessing, and we can take some time off. By the end of the day, it's just a civil society idea, right? But if it worked, as it actually did work for the water savior team, well, then the public service can say, well, it was our idea all along, which was true, actually. And so they would receive a trophy from the president shaped like Taiwan with a microprojector underneath. And if you turn on the microprojector, it shows, well, Dr. Tsai Ing-wen giving you the trophy, promising whatever you did in that particular district for the past 3 months, well, it's going to be rolled out nationwide in the next year. And so this is a presidential executive promise as Hackathon Award. There's no prize money, but the state will absorb the budget, regulation, and personnel required to roll out whatever thing they did on a local scale to countrywide. So we got a lot of things done by amplifying the best ideas, the ideas that are practical, and not just best practice, next practices from the public service. But if they don't work out, well, no harm done, because, well, it's just a hackathon. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, I still find this one of the most amazing examples. At Catalyst, we talk a lot about not just developing social innovations, but institutionalizing them in government programs and policies. And this is the dream, like to have every year, like a whole format where proven social innovations get institutionalized as the goal of the program. It's just, yeah, I think every country should do that. Now, you of course don't need to convince us about these things, but how would you describe the benefits of this approach to other governments? What are the arguments that we can use as we talk to politicians in our countries? Like, how does this help with economic and social development? How has it helped you get through the Corona crisis? Like, the tangible stuff that people are interested in.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, usually when we say, we counter the pandemic with no lockdown and the infodemic with no takedown, usually people do pay attention because there was, remember the two dogs like fighting a line of rope. In many public service around the world, there is now this kind of false trade-off, false dilemma in their mind, right? Either more civil society, more democracy, more human rights on one side, but at the expense of public health and economic growth. Or on the other hand, developing the economy, making sure that we relax the lockdown and so on, but that may lead actually to even more human rights sufferings if the pandemic goes out of control and so on. So in many jurisdictions, this is imagined as a slider, but that's not the truth because it's only a slider if people think about the traditional public-private partnership, right? If the state assumes more power, then it's more top-down. But if you give some data to the private sector, then they may abuse it, and then it will lead to human rights sufferings and things like that. And again, this is like a zero-sum between public sector processing of data, which is sometimes thought as state surveillance with the other private sector, which is sometimes thought as surveillance capitalism. So it's like a no-win situation, and compromise positions are even worse, as we can see in the counter-pandemic efforts around the world. So the Taiwan model, as we call it, is basically saying, well, there is a social sector, right? The social sector's main product, just like private sector produce the marketable goods and services, the public sector produces regulations and laws. Well, the social sector produce norms. And if the social sector is given the space to make the norms, and the public sector amplifies, so the private sector need to implement it, well, then it's the best of both worlds, because people understand that it's in their own rational self-interest, like wearing a mask to guard one's face against one's own unwashed hands. They don't need a lockdown or a fine to do that, because for all practical purposes, I got this from the Pride Parade. So all the event organizers and so on, they have a strong incentive to make sure that people wear it for all day long, because it's part of their social sector solidarity. So you don't need to market this as a luxury item. Neither do you need to enforce a fine. But people wear it all day long anyway, because for Taiwanese people, this is now art. This is now self-expression. This is everything that the social sector stands for. So I often also say that, for example, when we, in 2019, work with Facebook, so that Taiwan is the first jurisdiction that Facebook offers the open API for social and political charge advertisements during the presidential election session. And they also banned the foreign sponsorships of all such advertisements in Taiwan. But the way that they conformed to this is not because we made a new act. We didn't make any new act in 2018 or 19 about this. Rather, it's because the people back in 2017 occupied the printer of the audit office, printing the office expenditures and campaign donation records, because at the time our Freedom of Information Act is paper only for that particular part. And so they printed out everything, scanned it, turned it into computer vision projects like a CAPTCHA, and actually did across those CAPTCHA, what we call OCR, Otaku Character Recognition, so that we get the structured data for investigative journalists to publish in the 2018 election that the expenditure and donation need to be transparent and public auditable. And then we discover that the advertisement on social media was not filed by and large as political expenditure or donation. And that is obviously a loophole. And so if Facebook does not conform in 2019, then they actually will face social sanction. And social sanction to them is actually much more serious than any law whatsoever. Because for laws, they can change some workaround, just like people do with patents. But if there is a popular social sanction, and people would point to PTT saying they have signed on the Counter-Disinformation Accord, why is Facebook not doing its job? There really is no argument for Facebook to fight back. So they just implemented that. So for many public servants and politicians, I would also cite this kind of successful negotiation, like trade negotiation with a co-government like Facebook, as one of the strengths of Taiwan model. Because if you do anything top down, then actually the civil society is decimated, like cut down by 10% in their bargaining power. But if you foster the Taiwan model, actually you get to negotiate with this co-governance partners, stakeholders much more easily. So Uber, Facebook, and so on, these are also our most convincing examples.
Yeah, very nice. Now, again, like my chocolate, because I am here in Germany, we are about maybe 10 light years away from what you were describing. Other countries are a bit more advanced. I don't know, like Israel is maybe only 5 light years away. What tips do you have for other governments? And maybe even can you differentiate between like what should a country like Germany do first, like the very basics before they move before you move on to the things that a country like Israel would do next?
Dark chocolates. Okay, maybe not dark chocolates. I think universal broadband is a very good beginning. Because in our experience, if we do not have universal broadband, then all the digital democracy advancements will be politically controversial, because people will say, well, you're excluding the rural places, you're excluding the remote islands, so much so that when we design our 5G spectrum auction, we make sure that the 5G, especially millimeter wave, is deployed first on the most rural and remote places. So the more rural it is, the more advanced it becomes. And this is basically a way to ensure that this is maximally inclusive. And so now in Taiwan, I made a promise saying, if any point in Taiwan you don't have access to at least one telecom operator that offers you just for 16 euros a month, unlimited 10 megabits per second internet connection, then it's my fault. Like personally, you can call me. And so we by and large deliver it. But a few months ago, I actually got an email, and the sender says it took me half a day to send this email. I was in a quarantine place, a central quarantine place near the Beito Mountains, and the site that didn't face the street doesn't have telecom reception. So I have to spend 14 days there with no Netflix. And you promised that broadband is a human right. I'm suffering a human right condition. And lo and behold, I called the NCC and the CHT, the telecom provider. And so just after 2 weeks, there's a new telecom tower there and with full broadband access. But by that time, of course, he's already out of quarantine. But he made a point of driving back there to measure it and to report it on social media. And so having this kind of dedication, I think really makes this a nonpartisan thing. Really makes it not just something for our NCC or FCC or whatever to answer, but rather this becomes a backbone for the telehealth, for the tele-education, for all the constitutional protected basic rights to be able to build on it. And so then we will move to the next step, which is media and digital competence, not literacy. As you can see, the primary school teachers teaching climate science using the air boxes is not teaching literacy, right? This is not teaching numeracy or literacy, which is about the ability to interpret numbers or text. This is about producing data, contributing to the narrative, aware of the bias. Indeed, the GDPR concepts of data stewardship, joint controllership, and so on is impossible to teach, but they are very easy to learn once you become an operator of a airbox. And so changing the curriculum from a literacy or numeracy-based conversation to a competence, like each of the students fact check all the presidential candidates during their debates in real time. That sort of thing, I think, is the next step. So just having these two steps, I think, will go a long way. Yeah.
Oh gosh. It is so. It makes a lot of sense. It's just that you would expect that in Germany in the 21st century we would have the broadband part covered, but we really don't. So yeah, it's a good point to get the basics done first. Now, if those are the first steps that the government should take, what can civil society organizations, social entrepreneurs like the ones in the Catalyst Network do to support them or to nudge them in that direction?
Mhm. I think for many social entrepreneurs, our strength is that we speak both languages, right? We speak the language of solidarity, but we also speak the language of markets. And so for the government who really can only change the direction once every year, that's called the budget cycle, showing small prototypes, small pilots that measurably does better than the governance as usual, right? The GAU is important. And so that's the whole point of presidential hackathon, which, by the way, learned from Germany. It started with me learning about the prototype fund, which is a very similar thing from Germany. The only difference, there's not much difference. There's the same emphasis on open innovation and all that. I think the only difference is the follow-up. In Taiwan, we managed to secure the president office's follow-up, which made sure that social entrepreneurs are happy even if they don't make into the top 20 cut, because we use quadratic voting, right? They also identify through quadratic voting a new voting system that promotes positive sum voting decisions, not zero sum or negative sum voting decisions. So during the QV round, already, even for people who didn't make it into the top 20, they would already identify the groups that had the most synergy with the social entrepreneurship project that they were using. And so they would often voluntarily join then the groups that actually made the cut and help realizing it happen. So shaping something as a competition sometimes has drawbacks for social entrepreneurship. So we always use quadratic voting. And nowadays, we're also evaluating quadratic funding and so on. These are innovations from the Ethereum community so that we can then apply the same pro-socialness between the social entrepreneurs so that each of us are then invested into getting the top 20 team actually working as quickly as possible so that a large amount of people experience that this is possible in the first place. And then it becomes very easy actually for the mayor or the president to simply say, oh, this is the will of the people, let's implement it. Indeed, when we run this in Bowling Green, Kentucky, the Polish conversation, we discovered that the top ideas are not anything that people would think of as conservative or liberal or leftist in US politics, right? It's not those ideologies. Indeed, the top overarching cross-group consensus is saying that existing STEM education needs to change into STEAM education. The art, being a creative field, needs to be part of the competence framework in the STEM. So this is non-political, non-partisan, right? It's just using other methods. This will not surface to be the top agenda. But once people learn it's the top agenda, it's very easy for the mayors or president to say, if this is the will of people, let's make it happen. This doesn't even cost anything, right? This is just a rearrangement of curriculum. And then, as you can see, diversity and inclusion in broadband access is always very high on the agenda and so on. But what I'm trying to say is that once people understand things like police produce signals over noise in a very predictive fashion, then the public service will think of this as a time saver because they will hear those complaints anyway. But if the crowd helps moderating itself, then they can spend the time understanding that these are really the good enough consensus of the people. So that's what social entrepreneurs can do. They can set up kind of ad hoc policy conversations to surface the common good enough consensus and prototyping it so that it's impossible to ignore. And indeed, it doesn't pay politically to ignore.
Right. Now let's move on to some of the questions that we have in the chat in the last good 5 minutes that we have. One question comes from Nico, who is asking, how do you get these intersectoral partnerships going so fast? I mean, we are all aware that they can happen and that they can be impactful, but I think the examples that we have in mind take ages to get off the ground. So what do you do differently?
Yeah, I think the most important thing here is to make sure that during the non-emergency times, there are already ongoing data collaboratives tackling the issues that people are concerned. For example, I used the example of PM 2.5, right? The air quality detection. That's a great example because everyone suffers the same, right? When the air pollution comes, and everyone want to understand, is this something we can do, like cutting even more motorcycles, non-electric ones, I mean, or whether there's nothing we can do because come from overseas, and this is impossible to answer without sufficient amount of people doing the real-time measurement to build a climate model, right? So then with this infrastructure, when emergency comes, already there exists solidarity between all the stakeholders. People already know, for example, the National Center for High-Speed Computation offers free GPU if you want some GPU. People already understand here is this open source OpenStreetMap community, so that you don't have to pay Google a lot of money in order to get a map box displayed and so on. And so when people's desire for a new arrangement of data comes, then in all the stakeholder groups, there exist at least one or two people who have done this before. And once this is the case, then of course, just like if you run yearly drills on counter-pandemic, which is what Taiwan did since 2004, when SARS actually came and the collective intelligence tells you to start playing the SARS playbook, you don't need coordination, right? People will just do whatever they did in the drill and then play it by the ear from there. And so having this like daily, at least weekly iterations based on the things that people care about deeply together, I think this is the most important.
Yeah, so build the social and technical infrastructure first. Again, I wouldn't know how to convince the German government to do that, but it does make a lot of sense as a step. Now, since we have you already here, I would like to put you on the spot, and I mean because you are one of the pioneers in the field of civic innovation. What can you and your team do to help other governments? Like, is there like a standing offer? Like, can people come to visit, learn from you? Like,
Yeah,
what can you do?
Definitely. Yeah, the Presidential Hackathon International track is designed for that. And we'll announce the details, I think, in a few weeks. But the upshot is that if you propose something that can tackle the climate crisis or emergency or doomsday, however you want to refer to it, the climate situation, and in a way that is data-based, based on collaborative data partnerships, then we will sponsor you and your team and anyone you would like to invite, also the judges and so on, to Taiwan around the end of this year, so that with the finding you some not just Netflix but something productive to do during the quarantine. Hopefully you're vaccinated, so it will be a short quarantine, and we'll figure out things together. And so yeah, that's our standing offer. We will make at least 5 such teams, just like our 5 domestic teams, and make it visible, not just domestically in Taiwan, but also through our diplomatic networks.
But that would be, if I understood it correctly, for citizen sector initiatives, right? But like, let's say Germany finally manages to get a digital ministry or something.
Yeah,
and
then
course,
they can be co-sponsors, right? The U.S. de facto embassy, the AIT, was a co-organizer for a presidential hackathon, and I think still is for this year's. So if you become a sponsoring partner, you get to also nominate your judge, or if you can nominate one of your NGOs to be the judge, and so that we can highlight the promises together. So it's not just a Taiwanese president promising things, but also your president or prime minister promising things. And so previously, for the past couple of years, we focused on open contracting. So open contracting partnership is kind of our global co-sponsor, but you can also work as catalyst to spread the international track message. This is still last year's message. We'll get a new message soon. And so if there's any government who want to be co-sponsorship, maybe they care about climate action. I mean, who doesn't know? They can join this year, or we can collaborate to set next year's theme.
That sounds fantastic. I think actually we are going to propose that. National elections are going to happen in September, and we already have a list of ideas that we are proposing to the government. So this could be a concrete one that we just add to the list. We are approaching the end of our fireside chat. Thank you so much, Audrey, for taking the time. And again, congratulations for being one of our Catalyst Government Award winners. As you can, like my yeah, the chocolate is empty, but I will not give up hope, and hopefully can be productive for the rest of the day, this time at least. If you have any further questions, you can reach Audrey surprisingly easy, which is one of the, as you have probably understood by now. So do make use of that opportunity. And yeah, for the final words, I'm just going to copy a phrase that Audrey uses a lot. Live long and prosper. Thanks so much for being with us. See you all later.
Peace and long life. Bye.